If you're watching this on the VLE or are floated by on YouTube, a very warm welcome. My name is Rory Lees-Oakes, and today we're going to do quick book reviews 3. This is the third part of the book reviews. You can find the other 2 parts there on the Counselling Resource channel as well. The first book we're going to look at is Person-Centered Counselling in Action. It's ideal for students on level 3 and level 4 counselling courses, and it's also ideal for practitioners. I still have my copy, which I bought as a student, and it's on my desk, and it's full of post-it notes and bookmarks, and it's just a really useful book to have. The strength of the book is it's written by 2 very well-respected practitioners, Dave Mearns and Brian Thorne, who have really developed the person-centered counselling method in the UK. And the book really features lots of questions that are asked to the person who's reading it. In person-centered therapy, the therapy relies on the relationship between the client and the counsellor. And in terms of the counsellor, there's an old saying in therapy that the client can only go as far as the counsellor is willing to go themselves. If for some reason the client brings up material that the counsellor can't work with, or feels embarrassed about, or is uncomfortable with, then what will happen is that the counsellor won't work with that material, perhaps finds it difficult to reflect back and paraphrase that material. So consequently, what happens is that the client then may change the subject. And counselling training, certainly person-centered counselling training, is about self-awareness in the therapist. It's about asking us the tough questions. What does make us uncomfortable? How can we get to a point where we can offer a really full relationship to our clients without the fear of having blind spots? So the book itself is separated into chapters, and there's a discussion on certain ideas of theory as it links to practice, and also a checklist at the end of each chapter, so that you can ask yourself some fairly telling questions, and it's a good guide for reflection. It's a must-have if you're a student on a person-centered counselling course, and I would say it's very useful if you're a practitioner. As always, you can buy these books on either Amazon or you can buy them on eBay second-hand. You can get them very cheaply. What I would say is, in this case, try and buy the latest edition. The picture you see is the latest edition, and because they've updated it, and some of the thinking has changed from the edition that I have, that I've got here. So I'd suggest you buy the latest edition. The next book I'm going to look at, it's ideal again for level 3 and 4 students, and again practitioners. If you're practicing in transactional analysis, then it's a very useful book. It's called The Games People Play, and it's written by Eric Byrne. There's an interesting story behind this book. It was published in the 70s, and it was meant for therapists. It was never meant for the general public, but the general public, certainly in America, really took it to their hearts, and it became one of the best-selling books generally for about 20 years. And I think why that is, it's very accessible, and it looks at interactions, how human beings interact, and some of the basic patterns of behaviour they get themselves into. It also kind of looks at the ways that people can defeat themselves, where they can set themselves up to fail. It's written in very accessible language. And in fact, I got my copy long before I became a therapist. I bought my copy when I was in a bookshop in Manchester many years ago, long before I had any thoughts of becoming a counsellor. So it was an interesting book then, and it still remains probably one of the pivotal books if you're looking at transactional analysis. So I'd recommend that. And again, with this book, I would tend to look on eBay. You can get them very cheaply, and they all have different covers on them. I'll put the ISBN numbers in so you can do a search. This is a general reading book. I got this for Christmas in 2010, and I've called it a food for thought book. It's written by Dorothy Rowe, who is a well-known psychologist. You sometimes hear her on TV programmes. You certainly hear her on Radio 4, or used to hear her on Radio 4 quite a lot, when they needed a speaker to talk about psychological issues. I bought this book actually because I heard her being interviewed on Radio 4, and I liked the sound of it, and I bought the hardback edition, which cost a little bit more, but I wasn't disappointed. Dorothy Rowe talks about the reasons that people delude themselves, and we see this in therapy. We sometimes see clients convince themselves of things which aren't perhaps particularly true. And she goes on to expand this idea into the general world, and she moves from therapy into the political world. So she talks about things like weapons of mass destruction and all sorts of ideas in the financial markets where people have deluded themselves into believing what they were doing was correct, but in fact history and hindsight would say that they've not gone down the right path. It is very funny. It does lack critical analysis. She does go off on a bit of a polemic, which is, I guess, it's a criticism of the ways that people do things, and it's certainly she lays into governments and financial institutions without restraint in this book. But it did leave me with the idea that people can actually invent their own reality, and for me, it does strongly link with Roger's idea of experience, linking in with experience. Rogers famously said, Carl Rogers, that he trusted his experience, but he was smart enough to talk about having it checked in new and primary ways. And in this book, it goes on to show that some people just link in to their own experience, which perhaps isn't the reality. So if you get a copy, you can get it in softback now, or you get it on eBay. I'd read it. It is a very interesting and entertaining read. Okay, the next book, again, I would call this general reading. It doesn't really link into any course content. It really is food for thought. It's written by Viktor E. Frankl, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor E. Frankl was a neurologist who was a prisoner in a concentration camp during the Second World War. And his training and his just sheer willpower to survive gave him the ability to look at human behaviour from the perspective of the prisoners. And he talks a lot about existentialism. Now, existentialism, very simply put, is the realities of life. And for Viktor Frankl, it was the fact that people are born and people die. And in the case of being in the concentration camp, people lived in horrible conditions and were treated really, really horribly. But how the human condition could adapt to that and how people could survive it mentally. It was written very close to his release, so he wrote it in 1946. And I think the interesting thing for me with this book is that he went on to develop his own therapy called logotherapy. The book was updated in 1983, so if you get the later editions, it doesn't only tell of his own view of the human condition from the eyes of a concentration camp inmate, but then it goes on to expand the theory that he later developed called logotherapy. I got this book as a gift from a friend, and I was a little bit scared of reading it because I thought the material might be really hard. Actually, some of the material is hard, but what I was left with at this book was that the human condition is incredibly powerful and that people have the ability to survive even the most impoverished circumstances and find meaning. They may not find healing, they may not find forgiveness, but they may find meaning, and for that I'm eternally grateful to my friend who has sent this. So Viktor E. Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, and again I recommend that. If you want further information, if you're watching on the VLE, I'll link to a book list that you could access, and if you're watching on YouTube, what I will do is I will put an Amazon and an eBay link in the box below, and then you can type the ISBN numbers in and search for the books and look at the book reviews and make your own mind up. And finally, thank you for watching.